And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this Thursday early evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is Quentin Tarantino's 62nd birthday. And by this point, spring of 2025, if you go back a year, we would have probably expected that his 10th and final film would be getting ready for release. And he had talked about this project. The proposed title was The Movie Critic, and they were different ideas. It was going to be with Brad Pitt. Maybe there was a connection between his character and somehow Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There were all these theories that were being floated, and most of the theories ended up being irrelevant because Tarantino surprised almost everyone by canceling it, or maybe canceling is the wrong way of phrasing it, by dropping the project entirely. And this is something that many filmmakers and many writers have discussed, where just because you, at a certain point, have your heart set on a particular project, or you want to make a certain film, or you're writing a particular story, if you don't feel 100% that this is for you, or that you should be taking a shot at this particular project, you don't do it. And people were disappointed because we wanted to get another Quentin Tarantino film, selfishly, but I respect the grind, and he respects the grind and the craft, and he will not make another movie until he is as certain as he can be that is the best he can do, the best project that he can do. And my guess is he did not see enough upside to whatever he was working on as far as the screenplay and ideas maybe he had for casting or maximizing this particular story. He probably just didn't think it was good enough. And he probably thought it wasn't good enough for him specifically. If it's the sort of project that someone else would have picked up on and said, oh my God, this is incredible, for them, but not for Quentin. And every great filmmaker is a perfectionist to some degree. But I feel like he really does take this 10th and final film seriously. Now, who knows if he's going to end up making an 11th movie? He says he's going to make one more film and walk away. And we're already 6 years past his previous film. I mean, there's a little bit Kubrickian here with the gaps between projects. And this is somebody, it's not as if he stops working, but he doesn't like to rush things. He wants to make whatever he's working on as great as he can, as cool as he can, leave no stone unturned. And certainly almost everybody would put him on the unofficial list of greatest living filmmakers, a top 10. There are those who would put him in the top 5. And there are even others that would say, no, he's the greatest living filmmaker right now. It's him. And I really can't take issue with any of those. Off the top of my head, I would immediately put him in the top 10. Would I put him in the top 5? I don't know. How do you compare Quentin Tarantino to Pedro Almodovar? How do you do that? You can't. So these are not real arguments. They're just conjecture and speculation and giving subjective opinion. But one thing that's not really subjective is how distinctive, how unique his work is, how incredible of a writer he is, and the way he shoots his films, sometimes literally, but the way he stages certain sequences. He wouldn't have the camera in the same place as, let's say, a Steven Spielberg or a Francis Coppola. There is just, he didn't go to film school. As he said, I didn't go to film school, I went to films. And he took as much inspiration as he possibly could from watching what somebody like me, the 400 Blows, watching Francois Truffaut films or Jean-Luc Godard films and learning as much as he could and figuring out if he was ever in a position where he could apply that knowledge, he wasn't going to fuck it up. He wasn't going to blow it. But as many of you know, his entry into the business was one of a combination of luck and incredible talent. And it's a story that's worth repeating because a lot of you probably don't know, how did he get his start without having some kind of a big recommendation letter or knowing someone in the business or like, well, how did he do it? He moved to LA. I think he was 17, didn't have the best relationship with his mom, who thought that he was, I'm sure she thought he was brilliant, but she didn't think that he was going to do anything in the movie business. She was just he was wasting his time. He's working at a video store. Was it called Video Archive? Something like that. I forgot the name of the video store. He's working at a video store, and it's around 1990, and he writes a screenplay for what would become Reservoir Dogs. Now, I don't know what books he read to kind of get his craft to such a high level, because you could have super talented writers, but if the craft is way off, it doesn't matter how great they are as a writer. If no one knows them, they're going to take a look at it and say, well, I can't read this. So whatever he read, remember, this is pre-internet we're talking about. He probably hammered out that script on a typewriter, but the craftsmanship was up to par, he thought. And it was a question of, can I get my script to anybody in the business? Now, I can tell you firsthand, years after that, it's easier said than done to get people with some level of clout, or people who actually could start the process of making a movie or giving you a deal. I'll option the script. I'll give you $1,000 up front, whatever the deal might be. It's really difficult if you are again, the Bob Dylan, if you're a complete unknown with zero connections and you don't even have New York University or Columbia or Harvard or so-and-so was my professor. Oh, I know him. And that can sometimes get you, in the proverbial door. Tarantino knew nobody, but he was reading his local newspaper sometime or I think it was probably early 1990. And he noticed that Harvey Keitel's wife was teaching an acting class not far from where Video Treasures, or I don't know why I keep having, I have the word archive, but I think it was something like Video Treasures was the name of the video store. But he sees that Harvey Keitel's wife is teaching an acting class, and he actually thinks to himself, I'm going to take this class and I'm going to be so good in the class and I'm going to impress her so much that when I ask her, hey, I wrote this script, can you take a look at it? And if you think it's as good as I like to think it is, maybe you can show it to your husband. He plotted this out ahead of time. So he signs up for the class, and not surprisingly, we know he's not really a very good actor. He's pretty bad. I'm sorry to say he's not a good actor in my opinion. I mean, who am I? But he tried hard in the class, and the endless trivia that he had stored in his head, even up to, let's say, through 1989, the amount of knowledge that he possessed dazzled Keitel's wife. She couldn't believe that he was real. That is how impressive this kid was. That is how extraordinary his recall, the way that he spoke, the fact that he appeared to be the kind of genius where he had too many colliding thoughts in his head at the same time, but he was still able to make sense. And she thought he was a character, good sense of humor. So he got up the nerve and the courage one day to, I wrote a screenplay here, and I don't, really know anybody in the area or the business. And, I'm trying my hardest in your class, and I hope that I'm doing okay, but could you take a look at my script? And she said, of course. Now, people in the business say that a lot and then don't actually do it. So to her credit, she was at least going to give him a couple of minutes of her time and look at the first couple of pages. Now, she's not a script reader, but presumably she may have done scenes with Harvey at home. We don't know the mechanics of that, but she knew what a bad script versus a script by somebody who knows what they're doing would look like. And when she cracked open the pages, old-fashioned pages, not, an email, and you're reading it on your e-reader or your phone or your tablet or your iPad or whatever, she was struck by how polished it was and how it looked like it had been written by an actual professional and not this crazy kid, but she knew obviously that it was his. So she read a few pages and she took it home. And the thing with Harvey Keitel at this particular point in history, his career had dipped. He was still working. He was in some somewhat high-profile Hollywood productions, such as, not a good movie, The Pickup Artist with the very young Robert Downey Jr., and Molly Ringwald and Bob Gunton. Bob Gunton, years later, of course, the warden in Shawshank, man up and vanished like a fart in the wind. But Keitel, although his career was at a lower ebb, he was still a name. He'd still worked with Scorsese. He was still somebody that people, if you name dropped him, it meant something. At least it was supposed to mean something. So Keitel's wife, gives Harvey the script and said, listen, there's this crazy kid in my class, whatever. She says something like that. But I just looked at it and I don't really necessarily know what a great script would read like, but this seems pretty impressive to me. Why don't you give the kid like 10 minutes? Cause he's really, really smart and I like him and maybe I could introduce it, whatever she says to him. So Harvey Keitel presumably isn't really into it, but okay, honey, takes the script and devours it in one sitting. It's the best script he's ever read. And this is the guy who co-starred in Mean Streets and Taxi Driver. He can't believe some random kid in your acting class. Is this a joke? Everybody always assumes it's a joke, right? So long story short, he gets in touch with Quentin Tarantino. And Tarantino does not believe it's really Harvey Keitel on the phone at first, but then realizes, okay, it is. So Keitel tells young Quentin, I'm going to use my influence. I'm going to do everything I can to get this project going. And not only that, but to get your career started. I don't know where the hell you came from or how you know so much. I don't even want to know. You don't have to tell me now, but you're going to have a career and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens. And let's make a movie one way or another. So Keitel asked a very reasonable question of Quentin Tarantino, saying, look, you know that my career isn't what it had been, but I know a shit ton of people in the business. Do you want me to get Scorsese? You want me to get him on the phone? Would you like me to give the script? All of these different things that Keitel presumably told Quentin in the early, first bunch of times that they met. Then he asked, do you have an actor in mind for a particular role? And this is, again, assuming that Keitel can pick up the phone and get in touch with somebody. And Tarantino says, well, yeah, actually, I do. I wrote Mr. Orange. I was thinking of James Woods as I wrote this. I was thinking of James Woods. Keitel says, oh, well, Jimmy's a friend of mine. Well, that's fantastic. Okay. They go their separate ways that day. Harvey Keitel calls James Woods' agent and pitches him, I have this unbelievable heist story. Bad guys mostly, but I've never read anything like it. And the pivotal role is perfect for Jimmy. Woods' agent says something like, well, that sounds terrific. I know you'll vouch for this kid. That's great. How much money are we talking about? What can we guarantee? What can we guarantee Mr. Woods? Can't guarantee him anything. I just want to send you this script, and I guarantee you, if you look at it, within 2 minutes, you're going to give it to him and let's make a movie. I'm serious. Woods' agent says something to the effect of, we need $1 million up front with a guaranteed an additional 2 or 3, whatever he says to him. He says something like that. He's not going to accept the script without any money. Sorry, Harvey, goodbye. So Woods' agent almost literally hangs up on Harvey Keitel. And the first version of Reservoir Dogs, which would have had Keitel and Michael Madsen, but also James Woods, did not happen. James Woods was never notified. He was never alerted about any of this. Nothing. Tim Roth ended up getting the pivotal role of Mr. Orange, and not surprisingly, it kickstarted a fantastic career for him because he is absolute fire. He is dynamite as Mr. Orange. A lot of different people got involved, including Harvey Weinstein and his brother Bob. And I don't know if DeVito, I don't think Jersey Films, I don't think that DeVito was involved with this. I think that was Pulp Fiction was when that he first worked with, this kind of group. But they were able to make this movie very similar to the original script that Tarantino had shown to Keitel's wife and then Keitel. And he made a film that looked a lot more expensive than it actually was. It was funded independently. I think the budget was probably $3 million or less. A lot of the actors, such as Harvey, even Michael Madsen, didn't make what they normally would if this had been a Hollywood production. I mean, Steve Buscemi was more or less on the rise. He acted in a lot of independent films in that era, such as In the Soup, which was a big winner at, I think it may have been the same Sundance Film Festival, which was 1991. So when Reservoir Dogs hit Sundance, everybody went berserk. It was a similar reaction to 8 years later in January of 99 when the Blair Witch Project landed at that edition of the Sundance Film Festival, where people couldn't get enough of it. They had to put extra screenings out. Number one, to try to get the filmmakers the best possible deal, of course. But number two, because so many important people said, we want to see this movie. We got to see this movie. Even if they weren't going to make, or be in a deal-making mode. So according to legend, James Woods was at that festival and asked to meet Quentin Tarantino. He didn't know anything about Keitel reaching out to him, didn't know anything. James Woods goes over to, there's a kid, he's right over there, walks up to him. Kid, I love your movie. I can't believe what I just saw. Again, we don't know exactly what he said, but some variation on, you're amazing. Where did you come from? And I would love to work with you. I'm sure you get that all the time, but I would love to work with you. I'll even work for scale. You're a fucking genius. He says something very close to that. And Quentin Tarantino, we know that he's not afraid to say the wrong thing because he thinks it's not the wrong thing. He doesn't really give a shit. He's going to say things that might make people uncomfortable. He couldn't hold back. He said, I'm an enormous fan of yours, and I got to be honest. I wrote Mr. Orange for you. Harvey called your agent, and your agent laughed him off the phone. I just thought that you should know that. And that was the conversation between. It was something along those lines. I'm sure Tarantino was giggling and laughing, but Woods was not giggling and laughing. According to the legend of this story, apocryphal though it may be, but according to what I read, it's so good, I hope it's true. After the interaction with Tarantino, James Woods supposedly pulled out his 1991 era cell phone, called his agent, and fired him on the spot. But that's the way it goes. That had nothing to do with the success of the film. The film would have been probably as good with James Woods, but it wouldn't have been that much better. But it would have been nice. Maybe Woods would have read the script and not liked it and not wanted to do it. You don't know with people. It's very difficult to say for certain, oh, of course he would. I don't know. Well, I don't want to do another violent film because he was probably making The Hard Way with Michael J. Fox right around that time, or he was getting ready, or it was almost coming out. Do I really need to play another character shooting people? We don't know. But the success of Reservoir Dogs, it didn't do that well at the box office, but it began to gain a cult following on home video. And the success there is what enabled Tarantino, with his writing partner, who also worked in the video store, I think, Roger Avery, they were able to get into production what became Pulp Fiction. And the reason why I say it that way is it was not all along going to be this movie with these different stories. The connecting the various stories, that was not the original. That wasn't what they did. They wrote a bunch of stories and were trying to figure out, well, what do we do with this? Do we just try to make short films? Because you theoretically could do that. And then I don't know if it was Quentin, I assume it was him, or Roger Avery. They figured out a way to put all of those stories together. They probably added characters from one to the other as opposed to having all different characters. But whatever it was ingenious. And I will still say that Pulp Fiction is the best film that Tarantino ever made. I mean, that and Reservoir Dogs 1 and 1A. You can flip a coin. But Pulp Fiction, also not a big budget. Bruce Willis didn't get his normally. He was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood at the time, of course. He didn't make a ton for that. And John Travolta's career had really dipped. I mean, Harvey Keitel was never as big a star as the first iteration of John Travolta. Travolta's career had really hit the skids where he was like doing straight to video movies, weird films like The Experts with Ari Gross. And he did a movie called Shout where he played like a bandman. It was just like his career had gone to hell in a handbasket, even with the success of the Look Who's Talking series. But those movies aren't good. Speaking of Bruce Willis, they're not good. The first one was an enormous hit, has a few laughs. It's not good. Bad. But Travolta in that movie, Uma in that movie, Ving Rhames, unbelievable. It was the right cast and it was the right kind of challenging film for the time. for what was about to become the internet era, where word is starting to travel faster. The film was wrapped sometime in the fall of 1993, and it was ready for Cannes. And the jury foreman of the 1994 Cannes Film Festival was a very famous American actor, producer, director. Answers D, all three, Clint Eastwood. And Clint Eastwood believed that Pulp Fiction was the best film that any of the people on the jury that year saw. And it won the Palme d'Or. Now, I don't need to tell you, a French film festival, an American movie, it's not that likely that an American movie is going to win. And I don't know what the previous winner, American film, could it have been Taxi Driver in 76? I don't know. But it signaled this is a major talent, and this might be the best film to come out of some part of the Hollywood system in the last decade. People were already going nuts here. And I saw it, my old man, my dear old dad, Alan Philip Cohen, we got in on the ground floor. We saw it the night it opened in limited. It didn't open wide. It opened in limited release in the United States. When you live in a big state like New York, you're probably going to have a chance to see it in the suburbs. And it was playing in a couple of theaters in Suffolk County. My dad and I lived in Huntington at the time. And we saw it at the good old Comac Multiplex, a theater which has long, 15 years, gone the way of the dodo, as I like to say. And there are times, not just with movies, in life, where you have enormous outsized expectations for something that you really, 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 really are looking forward to. And I had been looking forward to seeing Pulp Fiction since reading the dispatches from the Cannes Film Festival and Entertainment Weekly and, you know, whatever publications I was getting at the time, Variety. The film exceeded expectations. It was even better than I expected. That is really rare, because I thought it was going to be a great film, and somehow it was even greater. And I left the theater thinking that this is, I mean, if somebody had said, is this the next Spielberg? I said, this is a peer of Spielberg. This guy's unbelievable. Now, as it turned out, I only saw Reservoir Dogs for the first time not that long before Pulp Fiction opened, with information not traveling anywhere near as fast. 1993 was still mostly analog. I had heard of the movie Reservoir Dogs. I had heard the name Quentin Tarantino, but I had not actually gone to a video store and rented Reservoir Dogs until I started New York University Film School right around this time. I started New York University Film School September of 1994. We saw Natural Born Killers, also written by Quentin Tarantino. Terrible movie. Bad movie. Great performance by Woody Harrelson. Don't like Robert Downey Jr. in the film. Rodney Dangerfield is a riot. It's not supposed to be funny, but I was dying, and that was the only part of the movie I liked. Oliver Stone, to this day, claims that Tarantino's script sucked. Tarantino, to this day, will claim Oliver fucked up my script. Words to that effect. Hated Natural Born Killers. But enough people, when we were gearing up for the release of Pulp Fiction, bro, you've got to see Reservoir Dogs. So I rented Reservoir Dogs. I watched it. I told my dad, you've got to see this movie. This is unbelievable. He watched it. He had the same reaction. And no more than a week, maybe 2 weeks later, we're at the Comac Multiplex, riveted, pinned to our seats, watching Pulp Fiction. I mean, that's a great movie memory. I remember a lot of being in the theater that night. The kind of hush of the crowd when some of the batshit crazy stuff happens. What an incredible experience. And to this day, an extraordinary film. So if I'm asked the question, because obviously there's way too much for, I could talk about this guy for hours without a script, without notes. But if I'm asked, what's my other favorite film? I'm slotting Kill Bill, the whole bloody saga, or whatever you want to call it. I'm putting that in third place. I believe that Kill Bill is as good. And this is where I don't necessarily like, I don't necessarily like the idea that one movie has to be better than the other. So like, if I say to you, I love that all three of those films equally. That's it. They're 1A and 1B, or 1A, 1B, 1C. Let's just say it like that. Kill Bill to me is I almost can't even put into words how good it is. The way that the tone shifts subtly into a kind of almost a spaghetti western style mode where there's very little sword play in part two. Where part one is, 75% of the movie, it feels like sword play, House of Blue Leaves and the Vernita Green, that incredible sequence, towards the beginning of the film, and the way that the story is told out of order, but somehow we never lose sight of it. We never lose sight of what the bride's process is. I've seen that whole bloody saga. I've seen it, 5 times. I saw Kill Bill Part 1 in theaters. I saw Part 2 in theaters. And at home, I had DVDs. That's something, to me, it has an even higher rewatchability than Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs. That's just me. And the casting of Uma Thurman, perfect. You can't imagine a better choice for that role at that time. Cameron Diaz could have done it, but I still feel like Uma was the right choice. And, she and Quentin had worked together. They had a fling, or maybe a fling is the wrong word. They used to go out. It was kind of secretive. So, who knows what happened? Neither one has ever really said, oh, we almost got married, or we would just get, no. But it's all fair, all above board now. It's so much time later. Both of the movies are now more than 20 years old. But if I'm asked to, after those three, I think probably Inglourious Bastards. But even with that, I think Django Unchained is incredible. It's an incredible film. And I don't know that I prefer Inglourious Bastards to Django, because there's so much right in Django Unchained. The performances, if anything, they're as good up and down the line in Django as any other film. Whether it's Leo, whether it's, Kerry Washington or Samuel Jackson. Wow. And Christoph Waltz, who is just a human cheat code. My gosh. Let's talk about somebody who went from an unknown to a 2-time Oscar winner. What a career, right? He's amazing. Don't love Jackie Brown. I was a little bit disappointed. I remember seeing it in theaters. I thought it was okay. For Tarantino, it's a lesser work. And when you're that good and you have that much to say, it's just difficult. And this, I think, is part of why he struggled with the movie critic. And I am 100% certain he's not going to release any of this. But if, let's say, a screenplay that he had completed for the movie critic that he was still tinkering with, if somehow that ever were to get out, I am 100% sure people would look at it and say, this is revelatory. Why did he abandon this? My God, because I don't think he's capable of not producing great work, because he is so fastidious, so meticulous. He's so prepared if it's research he needs to do. And he has such a great ear for how people spoke in the early 1990s, how people speak in the 2015s. He is a very keen observer of people and human nature. And the truly great filmmakers have that gift, that ability to absorb so much of what they've seen and so much of what they've learned and the people that they've encountered in their travel through life. And I hope, just like anybody who is this far into this episode, I hope that he doesn't actually retire. I hope he makes his 10th film and says, you know what? Yes, it's a lot of work, but I have more to say. And he looks at people like Spielberg getting into the upper 70s and Coppola still blasting away, trying to make another film after the failure of Megalopolis, and Scorsese still with more to say, making a movie with Leo and Dwayne Johnson. That actually sounds really interesting, the plot description. But whatever Quentin Tarantino ends up doing, what Stanley Kubrick showed is you don't have to have an extensive filmography to be on the exalted top tier of master filmmakers. If Quentin Tarantino doesn't end up making that 10th film, for me, his place in history is secure. I'm not putting him below Wells or Kubrick. He's there. He is on the top level. And Christopher Nolan, obviously, you can put up there right now in terms of the craftsmanship, the technical mastery, the wizardry, up there with Kubrick. And that's a difference between those two guys. Nolan and Tarantino like each other, but for Nolan, Kubrick is his number one, and Tarantino seems to have a lot of issues with not all of Kubrick's work, but there are films that other people will say, bro, you're nuts, that Tarantino has never really sparked to with regards to Kubrick, and also Hitchcock. But Hitchcock is somebody he talked about, I don't like that he went on as long as he did. He picked bad stories. Hitchcock shouldn't have made Topaz, wasn't worthy of his talents. You know, he should not have made Family Plot. Should he have made Frenzy? I don't know. But that's what Tarantino doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to just work for the sake of working. He has to believe in the material 100%. And it's going to be something that he generates. He's not going, he might appear in someone else's film. He did that in the 90s, movies such as, Destiny Turns on the Radio. But he is going to generate his own material. He's going to make his own film. And let's just keep our fingers crossed. I mean, he sure as hell wouldn't have lost his touch. That's not going to happen. I mean, many people thought that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was as good as anything other than maybe Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. They had it up there with Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained. But a happy 62nd birthday to the extraordinary, supremely talented, but a very hard worker and somebody who takes his position in the business as seriously as anybody. There's very little joking around when he's talking about the movie business. Quentin Tarantino turned 62 today, and I really hope that we have many more masterpiece films from QT. This has been episode 479 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your early Thursday afternoon here with me in New York. And if you checked out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.